Hi, I'm Phil Noble with Envision South Carolina, and we're here at the Greenville University Center talking with former Governor and former Secretary of Education, Dick Riley, the elder statesman of our state, and a great one at that. Thank you for doing this.
My pleasure.
Let's talk a little bit about, you grew up here, your family's been upstate forever in South Carolina. When did you first begin to have some sort of consciousness about South Carolina being different or unusual or a special place? Was it when you went off in the service, or was it earlier? What were the sort of early experiences that made you conscious of we as the people of South Carolina?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think a lot of times I get a lot of questions about my formative years and how I developed my involvement in leadership and so forth. and in that regard, I usually fall back on my father was an officer in the Navy, and we lived in Miami for 4 years and came back to South Carolina. And I was in like the 7th grade at Greenville Middle School, then junior high school. And the first time I ever got involved in a leadership way is I got involved in a declamation contest there. It was a big deal, the McManus Declamation Award, and the places was packed. I got into finals, the final 10. I was a young guy, didn't have a whole lot of friends back in Greenville with 9 other people who were very popular, very well known or whatever. So I drew number 10, so I was going to be the last speaker in this big event. And I sat there on the stage, and everybody was hollering for their various friends or whatever. And I said, if I'm going to do something, I've really got to give this thing a good lick. And so I kind of in my own mind got up and really laid this declamation out. I remember the first line was, "I am a refugee." It was about somebody who had just come to this country and what all they found. And I got a little off in the middle of it, but I did on my own for a while, and I got back into it. So I finished, and I got this great standing ovation, and I won the declamation contest. And people asked me, said, "When did you first decide to become a leader?" What I said, I think that had something to do with it. I really felt from there on that if I really put myself into something, I could do something with it. In South Carolina, of course, I grew up here in Greenville, and other than those years with my father in Miami. Then I was in the Navy for 2 years, and of course in law school and so forth, and then ran for the House as a very young guy in my 20s, and served 4 years there and then 10 in the Senate. And during that period, I really got to know South Carolina pretty well. I was a reformer in the Senate. I ran for governor, was a long shot. Really went out across the state. I headed up Jimmy Carter's campaign for president, and he was selected for this state. And I really began to realize what a wonderful state it is. It's a great size to start with. What are we, about 4.8 million, almost 5 million. The geography is good. We've got 3 big urban areas, so South Carolina, and then they're connected to Greenville, Spartanburg, and Columbia, Lexington, and Charleston, and North Charleston, and then these great middle-sized communities, Rock Hill, and Anderson, and on around Florence, and Orangeburg, and so forth, Aiken, Sumter, whatever. Really is a great place. Then we have the small rural communities. We have like almost 30% African-American citizens in this state. Education has been my big thing. Ever since I got into government, I really wanted to make a move on education. It was clear to me that if we were going to have a future in this state, we had to pull out of our past, change our culture really about how we looked at our state and looked at each other. To really take the community that had been discriminated against for years, and we were doing so much better with it. At one time, women were in that same category. So much better over the years, but boy, we still had a long way to go. And there was still this lingering subculture thing that we were pulling out of over the years. And that really has something to do with the makeup of the state. As I say, we're moving in the right direction. I think all of the pushing is in the right direction now. But I really feel heavy when I think about what has happened to the black population in South Carolina, not necessarily right now, but over the years. And I do think the makeup, the culture of the state right now is not centered on that, but it's underneath, and it is a pull on us to do something about it, and I want to do that.
You talked about the EIA, Education Improvement Act, as being a cultural shift, a cultural change in this state. Talk more about that and how you made that cultural change and how we can apply that to the challenges we've got now.
Well, of course, education is to me, the answer to all of our needs for the future. And education then is where I felt like we should make our real move. The Education Improvement Act, of course, we were the lowest support monetarily for education of any state, I think, other than Mississippi. And we had to have more money in the system. We had to have the system run well. We had to have a lot of conservative views that we weren't throwing money away, but we were very careful about it. And I had all those views. And it was a people's movement, and I was very proud of that. I really moved then, since I could not do but so much in the legislature, because it was controversial. Senate less than House, but the House money bill had to emanate in the House. And so we had to win the House, and that was very difficult. And when I analyzed it carefully over a number of months, I had like 23 people in the House out of 124 that were really committed to education.
23 out of 124 that were committed.
That's all I could get, and they were called, the press called them the Smurfs because they were little people.
I remember that.
They were not the speaker, they were not the
Smurfs.
chairman of the committee.
I'd forgotten that.
So but they were a committed little group, and they were fighters, and they knew how to count, and they knew how to work. And so we came forward really with the people. Meetings all over the state, as you recall. I went on state television 2 or 3 times, and we really got out of the legislature into the public domain, and it was very well received. And the people really kind of rose up. Every legislator had a stack of calls in their hand, people back home calling them. The halls were full of people all the time. And finally, we picked up more and more and more, and we finally got it done. And the people felt very good about themselves. All people, black, white, rich, poor, people in private schools, people in colleges and universities. We funded higher education during that period better than we had ever had before.
You funded higher education?
Higher education, to show you how if people get into education, get supportive of it, they support all levels of education, even private education,
that's a very interesting observation.
Mm-hmm. And that changed, in my judgment, Phil, the way people felt about themselves. And we had a major commitment for education. And I did a lot of work around in other countries and across this country to try to bring industry here, to try to really build the state up. And I'll tell you what people, the top leaders in Europe or Asia or wherever, we were not at the very top in test scores. We were coming up from the bottom. After the EIA, we pulled up enormously fast. What they were interested in is what was our commitment to education. Where did we think we were going in the future? The past, yeah, we had some troubles in the past. We were correcting those. We had a real people's movement, black and white together for education. And we had a commitment. And that's what they liked. That's what they wanted to know. They didn't ask me what our test scores were. They were concerned about it, I'm sure, but they wanted to know what was our commitment, and I clearly was committed to quality public schools for all children.
You said that when people got involved with it, they felt better about themselves. How it's a whole empowering strategy as opposed to, just banging heads in the legislature. I remember I read their oral history with Jack Bass about that. It's a brilliant piece of work. But it was very clear that you basically just set aside the legislature and went out and rallied public support. And you say people felt better about themselves for being engaged in that. Do you remember some manifestations of that, or? Well,
one thing, while it was going on and after the EIA was passed, PTAs were full. You had to get to a PTA meeting early to get a seat.
Yeah.
Before that, very half empty PTA room. And it's amazing, you can see, because the people felt like it was their movement, and they liked it. And they wanted to be part of their children's education. And they wanted to see their children do better and have a better chance, have a better opportunity. And I really got the sense that the people really felt like, yes, we passed a major piece of legislation, and the major people said it was the most effective of all the 50 states. But really, more than that, we had the people with this feeling that number one, they had done it, and number two, it was going to make a difference for all children. And it really had an effect of pulling people together for all children.
Are the lessons of that still applicable today? I mean, it is major change and reform. Is it still the EIA model? Bypass the, quote, leaders and go to the grassroots and build from there. Is that still a valid model in this day and age of the internet and people connected and distracted? Or is that a wonderful days of bygone democracy? Or is it still a viable model, do you think?
Well, it's a model that really is a movement. It's awful difficult to develop a movement. And it takes a lot of people. It takes leadership, but it takes a lot of good factors. And I think it's about time for a movement of that kind. The thing that I've been so interested involved with, the Riley Institute at Furman University, that I'm very much involved with, has a great program called the Diversity Leadership Initiative. Juan Johnson, who's an African American from Atlanta, is here, very much involved with it. He's on Furman's board now. And we have all of our alumni, 400, 500 people, meet once a year, and the topic we meet on is One South Carolina. That is what I think perhaps could be the next movement. It involves the word diversity. I would like to see South Carolina become a garden of diversity, to where people from other states, people from other countries said, you know, here's a small state, 30% black, 6% Hispanic, or whatever. Whatever it is, they're one state, and they're all working together. They believe in each other. They want to help each other. It's not us and them. That to me is more important. I'm a loyal Democrat, but that's more important to me than the party. It's more important to me than any of my other personal views, that if we can have all the people working together, and yes, education is a part of that. Becoming educated about the importance of diversity for one thing, but to learn together, to work together, to teach together, all of those things involving education and improving the people of the state.
How does the rest of the country and the world view South Carolina? What do they think of us?
Well, we've had a number of things that have not been fortunate in terms of the worldview, of the state view over the last several years. And that I don't say preoccupied with that, but it is a fact. Most people that know the state love to come here. They love to come here for vacation, as tourists. They love to come here to do business. South Carolina has a very strong reputation for being pro-business, and that's something I support too. I also support pro-jobs and pro-opportunities for people, and I think the people in this state do. Most of the business communities in all these various communities I mentioned across the state, they're usually very progressive, and they support quality schools in their community. They support hospitals and health care. They support justice and law enforcement and safety. You see that kind of thing happening all across the state. Now, as a state, we do get some publicity that people laugh about things that have happened to this person or that person, and walking in the Appalachian Mountains when we're in South America or whatever, and they smile and laugh when I say I'm from South Carolina. And that's all right, that doesn't bother me. But it does make you want to have people, when they say South Carolina, people say, you know, that is a place that's special. And why is it special? One is they're committed to education in a very serious way. And I do think that would take another movement to move there. And the other is diversity, that this is a state where the people know how to work together, to live together, to be together, and to provide this state with the kind of future that we all want.
In terms of the hallmarks, the message that you think we can deliver to the world to transcend the problems is, if we are the state that is in some ways leading in education and leading in the issues of diversity.
To me, that would be ideal. And I feel that touches everything else. I mean, that touches character. It touches values. It touches competence. It touches all of the other important aspects of life, in my judgment. South Carolina is very interested in religion and to the spiritual things, and that's a part of our state. And that also can be part of this effort, and I would love to see that. And you think of politics. My father was chairman of the Democratic Party when Jack Kennedy ran, so he was Jack Kennedy's chairman. Fritz Hollins was a close friend of Kennedy's. And I went around with him to make a lot of speeches or whatever, speaking for Kennedy. The big issue then was his Catholicism. Right. That was the big issue. That's everywhere you heard. They were talking about Rome. They were talking about the Pope. And really now, so many Catholics have come into the state and a very positive influence on the state. And you never, ever hear that. You know, that's done. Right. But back then, that hadn't been that long ago. Right. That was the big issue in South Carolina. And we need to get over those kind of humps, race, religion, culture, all of those things, and really come together as one people, and that's what I'd like to see us do, and do it with education.
Well, if education and the diversity, I mean, they're sort of in some sense two sides of the same coin, or at least related. Mm-hmm. What are the barriers to our being able to do that? I mean, are they institutional, are they historic, or is it, you know, the legislature? Is it the lack of leadership in local level? Is it our character of sort of hat in hand mentality? What are the barriers to overcome?
Well, I think the one big barrier is we are a conservative state, and I'm conservative Democrat. We have very difficult time turning loose the past. We perceive that to be a conservative thing, and it can be in many ways looked at as conservative, not wanting to change. But I think it's a seat of any difficulties we have in moving us forward as one people. And I would like to see that change. But that's typical generally of South Carolinians, that we love where we are, we love what we're doing, we love our families, our communities, but we kind of reach into the past to pull that forward when we ought to be changing some things, not everything. Sure. A lot of things of the past are great. And as I say, we've had so many peaks in our history, and then we've had some valleys. Well, we don't need to hold on to those valleys and pull them into the present and the future.
Is it a mindset? I mean, is this all just about South Carolina's historic cultural mindset that we've got to overcome?
Well, that's hard to say. Of course, everybody's different, and and I believe in those differences. And I love differences. I like people to be different, but still into helping to each other and interested in each other. And I don't think we have some kind of state mindset as that, and I might not be describing that accurately, certainly not, because they're so different from person to person. But I do think we are inclined as a state to thinking that it's conservative, basically, to hold on to the past. And as I said, some of that past we don't need to hold on to. A lot of it we do, but some of it we don't.
I have this sort of theory that in South Carolina, the prime political virtue, so to speak, is not really conservatism, but it's independence. But what has happened is over the last generation of Republican leadership, they've essentially managed to combine conservatism and independence together. But if you look at, for example, if you look at the governors who've gotten elected starting in 74 and 80 and Carroll County, there were always governors who ran against the system. There were always the outsiders. One or two exceptions, I mean, but by and large, the politics of South Carolina on the governor's level have been governors who ran against the status quo, Democrat or Republican. You know, is that a valid assessment?
Well, I think change is always good politics. You don't have to define what it's going to be, but we're going to do it differently. People like that. Liberals like it, conservatives, whatever. I've always recognized that this state had a very independent flow through it. And I was perceived as a Democrat, but an independent thinker. And,
right.
and I'm proud of that. I'm not ashamed of that at all. And I think that's good for the state. But you do have to come together and form a government, and then you have to govern. But in the political era, when governors are running, or members of the House or Senate, or U.S. Senate, or whatever, this idea of being a change agent, independent, is generally popular in South Carolina across the board. Everybody claims that they're going to represent change, that they're going to represent independence. Then on top of that is conservative, liberal, other ideologies that generally this state is independent and conservative, but we have a strong number of people who are on the liberal side, on the left, and then others, the majority, I'm sure, on the right. Probably the majority is somewhere in the middle, right middle and left middle, but in the middle. That's where the independents are. And that's generally probably more right middle than left middle.
In essence, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but change and reform trumps left and right.
I think it does. I think it does. I think people are inclined to be liberal in a good sense of the word, and that is they want government to get into improving things, and they're into improvement in whatever. Conservatives generally want to hold government down and that kind of thing. So you get into those interplays into politics. Then you have an issue come up. It always amazes me. Conservatism in the environmental world is perceived to be liberal.
Right.
You know, and you try to
Yeah.
understand all that, and you get
Right.
confused by all the terms. But to conserve our wonderful environment, and South Carolina is blessed with a beautiful, beautiful environment. That ought to be a real part of this coming together. Diversity of people, but let's all support our natural environment and so forth. And that is a conservative concept, and yet when you get into doing things to preserve the environment, people perceive that to be liberal. So you have that confusion. You always will have. It'll be a confusion right on. But we do have a kind of an independent spirit throughout the history of this state that's still there. But you have to realize this state has loads of people who are not native South Carolinians. I don't know what the majority is here, there, and yonder, but a large, large percentage of the people came in here from other places, other countries, other states way off, North Carolina, Georgia, whatever. And it's amazing how many people that make up this state are not native South Carolinians. The first time I ran for the House was in 1962. And I was a young guy just back from the Navy and whatever. And I had, as my campaign slogan, I had zero money, was veteran. I was proud of that. Patriotism, very important part of our South Carolina belief. Methodist, that was my religion. Native Greenvillian. To me, that was very important at that time. Right. Now, there are not a whole lot of native Greenvillians left. You still have the interest in spiritual things, the interest in patriotism in the country, and now we're a lot more amalgamated in terms of people.
This is a minor little detail, but do I remember correctly from your oral history with Jack Bass that your father counseled you against running in every race you ran in?
He did, and that he was very much knowledgeable about politics, and he wasn't too interested in me taking that route. However, when President Clinton called me and offered to send my name over for the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, I called my father, who was a good trial lawyer and a real bar supporter, former president of the state bar. He thought I ought to do that. So no matter how tough it was.
But you turned it. That was going to be one of my questions. And it happened a second time, right?
Well, the second time they called me and asked me did I want my name considered. And I said, no, I'm still into education, and that's what I want to do.
But why would you? I mean, it was toward the end of your term. I mean, you know, the Supreme Court's for life. You could have.
Well, it wasn't the end of my term, really. When the president first called me, it was really in my second year as Secretary of Education.
Right.
And I had worked all year to bring in some of the best people in the country and into the department, and had gotten the department pretty well straightened out. We still had a lot of things to do. But I was into that. That was a big responsibility to me. I was into education on the state level, and here I was in the education on the federal level. So that, to me, was the most important thing I could be about. Later, the president asked me to be his chief of staff. And I turned that down for the same reason. I said, you know, I can help you more over here in the Department of Education than I can over there in the White House.
And the second time was when they asked if you'd be considered. That was toward the end of your.
That was like 2 years later.
That was 2 years. That was still in the first term or the second term?
It was still the first term.
It was still in the first term?
Mm-hmm. Second term, he wanted me to be the chief of staff.
That's
when he first was elected. He called me into the White House. All the people, after we had 1,000 or so employees, Clinton and Gore were going to speak to the Washington people, their people. And the announcement came over there that the president wanted to see me, and I went in there, and it was Bill Clinton and Hillary and Leon Panetta. Leon Panetta was the chief of staff at that time. And the president told me he wanted me to be his chief of staff. And I was stunned at that. It's like he called me earlier to be head of his transition for personnel. I was stunned at that. But I had a very good relationship with the president. We'd worked closely together on a lot of things, especially education.
From the vantage point of going to Washington, moving globally and stuff, How did your perspective of us as South Carolinians and what we needed to do, did it change or was it just confirmed?
Well, I don't think it's changed. I've gotten a lot more interested in in what we're like and what people think of us as a state. I love this state. I love everything about it. And I want to improve it and make it better. And I don't like anyone to smile when somebody mentions South Carolina like it's some joke going on or something. The awful lot of people who are great thinkers, who believe in the state, who are good people, want to bring everybody together. And that's what the role I want to play in a small way, is to help develop that for them and then move this state forward.
The EIA was a major investment, if you will, long term. The Research Triangle part in North Carolina took 20 years before it began to bear fruit, and it's stunning now. Where would you be placing those long-term bets? Where should we in South Carolina be spending time, energy, and resources with the long-term payoff? I mean, obviously education in general, but I mean, is there some piece of it? Is it, or is it a larger, non-political focus that we'll have? Where's the long-term payoff that we could invest now? And 20 years from now, we go, that was a big idea that was right.
First of all, we copied the Triangle in North Carolina and started the South Carolina Research Authority when I was governor. Claude Scarborough, who's later my senior law partner, was head of the State Chamber of Commerce and worked closely with me to get that put in place. And it's been very successful, by the way. South Carolina has done very well, and you look at the Michelins and, and the BMWs, and Boeing and all of the other tremendous positive influences that have come from industry in this state, meaningful jobs. And I think we need to make it very clear that this is a very good place to do business. We've got to do more with those areas that are kind of underserved by meaningful industry and successful jobs. We talk about the corridor of shame up I-95 corridor. And I'm very much involved in that area too, to try to get the schools straight, to get kids where they want to stay in their community and grow their community, and not as soon as they can get out and hunt for somewhere else. So we've got pockets of the state that we really do need to do some serious work in. And again, education is the key in all of those. And you say, well, what about education? I think the most important thing for us to really be centering on right now is early childhood education. The early years, even preschool. If you're going to do something about the gap and do something about those people in the state who've not had the opportunities that others have had, and you need a boost, now you have to do that early. You can't wait till a kid's a junior in high school and say, well, he's 3 grade levels behind, right. So now we're going to do something about it. That can happen, but that's very difficult. So my feeling is, as I indicate to you, diversity, I think, is a key to the future of the state. I think we got some very positive things happening in that regard. And then I think education has to be part of it, and early childhood education right now, to me, would be the most important aspect of that. We've got a wonderful higher education system. We've got to maintain that. We've got to maintain quality public schools all across the state. That's the state's responsibility. But to move careful attention, almost a movement-wise, into early childhood would seem to me the right way to go.
Any regrets? Looking back, if there was something to say, I really should have done that. Any regret?
Well, I don't think so. I never did make a move that I hadn't thought about. I had a very supportive wife, by the way. Tunky and I were a team, and everything that I did, it was like having a good advisor with me. She would tell me absolutely what she thought. And my children, all my family have given me tremendous support. I've had tremendous support in Greenville, my home county, where I grew up. And that's always been a comforting thing to me, that the folks back home always seemed like a good place for me to end up.
Right.
And I've been very lucky, a lot of years, a lot of issues, and a lot of things, and I don't think I can think of anything that I have deep regrets about.
A number of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, I was at having a beer with 2 or 3 of your longest staff colleagues types. And I asked him, I said, I can't remember any sort of political issue that reflected on Dick Riley's character, that in the cesspool of Washington, the hardball politics, you sort of walk through it not only with your sort of character intact, but never assailed. Never, nobody ever seriously questioned your sort of character integrity or about any kind of events. How did you maintain that focus? How did you, what sustained you in being able to govern and operate and deal at the highest levels of the most crazy politics and never have that problem? That, from my perspective, that's the same.
No, that's a nice
but
question.
It's true. But it is absolutely true. It is the hallmark of your public service.
Well, if I had to pick out a reason, and I used to tell people, I'm so fortunate, served 8 years in Washington and all the controversy, and I stayed off the front page of the Washington Post.
Absolutely, yeah.
That, but education didn't need to be there. We needed to be on the education page. But anyhow, if I had to think one thing, as I say, I had a very supportive family. So when I'd go home at night, that was a comfortable thing for me, whatever. I might be in the most controversial thing in the world, in the legislature or in the Congress or whatever. So I'd come home at night, and that was comfortable, and I could read and study and talk with my family or whatever. I always carefully surrounded myself with whom I thought were the most competent, caring individuals I could find. I did that as governor. I did that as Secretary of Education. And just about everybody I asked to come into the Department of Education and everybody I asked to come into the governor's office came, because they had that same feeling that we were going to work together as a team. We weren't there for politics. We were there to try to do what we were supposed to do and do it well. And I think if I had to say one thing that kind of looked after me, was that I was looked after by a very competent staff. Say if you were a role model for someone, how would you describe yourself as being? That overwhelms me, the idea that I would be a role model for especially a young child. If then that child asked me, what should I do that's important to kind of be more like you, again, that would overwhelm me, but I would say this, is to be active, to get involved. I don't care which party or no party. I don't care which religion or whatever. Get involved on something that you think is important to your state and your country and to your fellow person. And I think that's probably the best advice I could give, is not to sit back and let somebody else do it, somebody else tell you what to do. Get involved, even not always as a leader, but as an involved, caring person. Envision South Carolina, world-class, globally connected.